Hey everybody, welcome to the week 3 lockdown coronavirus accounting saga. Um, we are going to review just a little bit what we've talked about previously with what exactly is manufacturing overhead. We'll talk about the ABC method, which you guys really won't need to know too much. You just kind of generally explain like how manufacturing overhead is applied during the conversion process. Um, I think as I sit here that we are not going to have you guys do a budget. You're going to have a take-home quiz. Um, but we'll kind of figure all of this out as we go along here. Um, Last time we looked at what activity-based accounting is. So what that really is how uh, things occur. So like we start off with um, you know, and a direct material that gets converted during the conversion process, and then we have a finished good. So again, we can watch as goods slide through their process, and we can see exactly, what expenses we have and where we're having them and what our assets are at in the conversion process. And we saw that flow. An important thing for us to remember when we talk about today is what is manufacturing overhead. So again, manufacturing overhead is looking at things like insurance on a building, um, the salary of the manufacturer, setting up the machines to make a batch run, pretty much anything that is not going to be like physically used as a direct material or direct labor is going to be manufacturing overhead. And that's going to be really important when we go through the conversion process today because we're going to look at how to apply those costs. Today, you're going to look at essentially what happens when you have these things. Now, don't freak out today. I would make you guys be able to do this, but just with the way everything is with the coronavirus and the amount of time, we're just going to really like your assignment is not going to be like figuring out a gigantic problem and predicting the overhead rates and all of this, but really what it's going to be is this generally understanding like how is the overhead rate determined and how would you apply it and when. So um, at the very beginning of any accounting period, what you would do is you would estimate your overhead. The overhead is the rate that we apply a cost. So like they look at them, they call them cost pools, but you look at for every individual like cost that you have. So like your unit related costs. So like what are your materials going to be? Like what's your cost going to be per? It helps you make a budget. You look at your batch related. So setting up the machines. How much does it cost you to make a batch of a product? So for some businesses, that means a new mold every single time. For some people, it just means getting everything cleaned and ready. There's all different types of costs associated with different like processes. Even bakers, like when they get in the morning, they know that there is a cost associated with making their breads or whatever per batch. Um, then you have things that are product sustaining. That's another example. So the batch related costs and the product sustaining costs and the facility sustaining costs are all examples of manufacturing overhead. Product sustaining costs are going to be things like advertising, things to keep the product moving and going. You could also look at it in terms of like help that people call in and get for the product, or things uh, like updates to the product if you're doing like software. And the last is facility sustaining. So the insurance for the building would be an example of that, utilities, all that type of stuff. So we're going back a few chapters here to look at all the different manufacturing overhead. Now we're going to figure out how that manufacturing overhead is applied to the product. So you're going to figure out what is your cost driver. Is it per bread, per batch, per whatever? And you're going to look at your estimated the amount of costs that you're going to have, your estimated overhead. So the estimated Like, how much money am I going to spend on batches setting up this material, divided by how many batches am I going to make? And that gives you the cost per batch. So in short, what you're doing is you're estimating all of your costs for the year and you're dividing it by the cost per unit. So how many units you're going to make. So how much am I going to have for the year in terms of my batch related costs, setting up the machines? And then how many batches am I going to make? That's my cost per batch. So during the period, you are going to apply your overhead. So every time you make a batch or you make a product or however you decide, whatever your cost driver is, you are going to then apply that estimated manufacturing overhead to that. So it's your best guess on what you're doing. You do not know exactly what your costs are. That would be ridiculous. Again, like with LIFO and FIFO, it doesn't make sense most of the time. With LIFO and FIFO, what you're doing is you're generally guesstimating what you're using in terms of actual costs. As you make a new batch, you guess, like you use your like budgeted guess, which is typically over budgeted. Like, so you guess that you're spending too much on how much it's costing you to set up the machines and how much the insurance is costing you for that batch and so on and so forth. At the very end of all of this, at the very end of the year, you go back and you look at your actual costs. So you compare, this is what I budgeted, this is where we actually spent. You look and see what that gap is, what the actual cost of the goods sold was, and then you take note of that. So again, what this really is a very complicated way and a very accurate way of budgeting, applying that budget and those costs per unit and through. So this is something that I would spend a lot more time on, but I'm going to give you like the super spark notes, so don't freak out if you don't realize it. With the activities-based accounts, activities-based costs, if you look at it, you have $200,000 in setup fees. You have 400 setups. Your manufacturing overhead per is $500. And so you can literally look and see, when I set this up, when I run these machines, there is a cost to setting this up and doing this. As you go through, you can have a much better idea of, yes, thank you, James. Yes, I see you. Go play. Manufacturing overhead costs are of like operating the machines. Well, the machines aren't a direct material. That's a manufacturing overhead. You have to figure out what costs that you're incurring when you're incurring them so we can keep the most accurate. If you look at this, you're not applying any of that beforehand. Just at the end, you throw it all on, and it's just not as accurate and it doesn't work as well. So what this does is the ABC method allows you to break down those costs and accurately say where those costs are coming from and why. So small example. This is a really simple example. Assume a company has a cost pool that varies with the number of machine hours used in production and another cost pool that varies on the number of productions run. They estimate that the machine-related costs are $500,000 for the year and believe that 50,000 machine hours will be used. They also estimate the production run costs of about $400,000 for the period, with 400 expected production runs. So you have to figure out what your overhead rate is. So you know that you're going to have, $500,000 and in costs and 50,000, or you estimate that you're going to have $500,000 in costs, and you're going to run the machines for 50,000 hours. So that's $10 of cost per machine hour. So if I run the machines 12 hours in a day, I know that costs me $120. Like, that's great for your accounting purposes. for each production run, you know it's going to cost you in the course of the year $400,000. Divided by 400 runs is every run is going to cost you $1,000. So when you know if you have a run that you run for 10 hours, it's going to cost you $1,100. $1,000 for the run, $10 per hour times 10 is $100. Therefore, you know that that costs you $1,100, which is great for like figuring out how much your costs are. And then you can apply that cost directly. So as you go through and you see, in week one, we had 8,000 machine hours and 125 production runs. You can see here that you just multiplied that 8,000 hours times 80, excuse me, 8,000 hours times 10 is $80,000. And your 25 production runs times 100,000, yes, $1,000. And your 25,000 production runs times $1,000 equals 125. Every week you can see that. Every week you can apply those costs and you can actually figure out how much it is costing you. It's really, really cool how they can manipulate all of this and apply it. So your homework after you have watched this video and taken the quiz, which is mainly over different types of manufacturing overhead and is that manufacturing overhead and stuff like that, is there's something that I used to use as a quiz and I've kind of changed a little bit. It's this 5 multiple choice questions and 1 kind of short answer question. You're just going to fill that out, make a copy of that, or I guess I'll make a copy for each student on Google Docs as an assignment, and you just fill out that assignment and turn it back in. So again, the big takeaway from the day is it is much better to budget, predict your costs, divide those costs by every time you do a production run or your anticipated number of production runs in a year or whatever, your activity driver. And then every time you do one of those things, apply it to the good that you're operating. If you guys have questions over this, you need help, just let me know. I'm more than happy to help you guys. Happy to set up a Zoom meeting, whenever. Talk to you.